From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
The Ear to There Podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Ear to There, it's time to start the fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Disney Podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. I am your host, Phil Gramlich, and each and every week I will bring you a different Walt Disney World word and then give you history, background information, hints, tricks, tips, all kinds of stuff about that word. Just think of it as your Disney World fix in 15 minutes or less, or over, or sometimes a lot over. Listen, I do my best to keep it in around 15 minutes. But before I get into this week's word of the week, it is time for my What About Bob segment. This is where Disney legend and retired Imagineer Bob Gurr takes questions from you, the listener, and answers them right here on the show. If you would like your question answered by Bob Gurr, you could always email it to me at phil@eartotheretravel.com. Or even better, you can call the voice line at 267-551-1971. Leave your question for Bob there. I will play it for him when I talk to him soon, and he will answer it on the show. Of course, the What About Bob segment is brought to you by the Waltland Bus Tour. That's where Bob himself hosts and narrates a bus tour out in Los Angeles and Glendale and through Burbank, where he shows you all the most important places in Disney history, most importantly in the history of the life of Walt Disney. Those tours are held once a month, and you can get your tickets by going over to waltland.com. So without further ado, here's Bob.
It's What About Bob? Bob Gurr, the legend, creator of the Matterhorn, the monorails and the Haunted Mansion. What about Bob, the Disney legend?
This is Ava from Carlsbad, and she's curious about the flying saucers. She said she's always heard that they were a great attraction, but doesn't know what they were, and would like you to describe the vision for the attraction and a little bit about how the ride worked.
Well, the flying saucers, we built that back in the 1960s. It was kind of a tricky, radical attraction at the time. If you visualize a hockey puck game, where you play the little sticks and the little levers, and you got a hockey puck, and it moves around on a table. Well, visualize a hockey puck maybe 4 or 5 feet in diameter, big enough, and it's got one seat on it, and you can sit on it. Both a child and an adult, one at a time, can sit on it. And think of a hockey puck table where you got holes in the bottom of the floor, and it's got a tricky little valve that keeps the air trapped under the table, but when the saucer flies over it, it actually makes the valve open. So that way you have air underneath the vehicle at all times. And as it moves across this, this full-size hockey table, you open and close the valves. That way you're not wasting all the air on outside the saucers. So it's a tricky thing in which the saucer is big enough in diameter that the air pressure will actually hold up the vehicle and the person riding in it. Okay, so now you levitated a couple inches off the floor. Now, if you lean in one direction or the other, you kind of tip it a little bit, and that means there's more air escaping out the opposite direction than which you leaned. So now you have the thrust of the escaping air actually is now causing you to move in the direction that you leaned. People catch on to that really, really quick. It's an instantaneous thing that you suddenly see how to do. We worked it for a number of years, but this was long before computers, and we would have needed computers to control this vast amount of low-pressure air in these great big chambers underneath this hockey puck table deck, so to speak. And what would happen is sometimes the saucers would start to bounce up and down, and this was caused kind of a harmonic bounce. Then pretty soon all the flying saucers are bouncing up and down, and then it reaches an unstable point where all the hundreds and hundreds of air valves open all at once, and there's a big sonic boom-like thing, and then all the saucers stop on the deck, and then that's that. We have to shut it down and restart the whole thing, get people off of it, get it restarted. It might take an hour or two to do that. Had we had computers that could control the big air baffle doors, almost like a giant air conditioning system in a big building, which was the kind of parts we were trying to use, we were just about 30 years too soon trying to do that. Obviously, we had another flying saucer recently called Luigi's Flying Tires, where they tried to do that with a very large vehicle that would carry two people, and then do it with air that doesn't have valves, where they use the air is blowing through all the holes all the time, and it takes hundreds of horsepower to do it. And after a couple of years, that thing just didn't work, so they took it out and put something else in there. So the flying saucer continues today to be a very, very mysterious ride from 50 years ago at Disneyland, and even though it was tried again, it didn't work. So that makes the original one even more mysterious.
And thank you again, Ava, for your question. And thank you once again to the always entertaining Mr. Bob Gurr. If you want Bob to answer one of your questions, again, you can email me at phil@eartotheretravel.com, or please just call the voice line at 267-551-1971. All right, on to this week's Word of the Week. And this week's Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week, is brought to you by the letter S. S for Star Wars. Yes, they are two words. I understand. It's getting harder and harder to have one word of the week, so I'll do two sometimes. It's cheating, sure, but anyway. The words are, or the word is, whatever you want to say, Star Wars. Now, this weekend marks the U.S. release of Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Of course, that is the 8th film in the Skywalker family kind of saga, and the 2nd film in the newest trilogy of Star Wars films. Of course, if you're a Star Wars fan, you know the original trilogies were episodes 4, 5, and 6. Then came their prequels, episodes 1, 2, and 3. And then a couple of years ago, we got episode 7, which was Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And here we are, all geared up for episode 8, Star Wars: The Last Jedi. So before I talk about Star Wars and its history in Walt Disney World and within the Disney parks and the future of Star Wars in the Disney parks, I wanted to go into a little bit about my personal history, my, shall we say, background with Star Wars, the films, and the franchise. So the original film, originally entitled just Star Wars, came out in 1977. This was before I was born. So I wasn't one of those people at the box office, at the theater, to see the original film when it debuted. And then Empire Strikes Back, the sequel, came out in 1980. Again, I was 2 years old. I wasn't going to see that one. But everything changed for me with the release of Return of the Jedi in 1983. I was 5 years old and my parents wanted me to see it. So my grandparents had copies, old VHS copies of both Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. So I guess they weren't that old. I mean, they could have only been a couple years old at that point, the copies of the films. But I sat down to watch those two films, both the original Star Wars and Empire, so that my mom and dad could take me to see Return of the Jedi. And my memories aren't totally clear about watching those first two films. I do have a pretty distinct memory of finding out that Darth Vader was, in fact, Luke Skywalker's father in Empire Strikes Back. That was one of those holy cow moments of my childhood. I clearly remember sitting on this brownish orange checked couch, very 80s like, in my living room, in my old house in Philadelphia where I grew up. I was sitting on this couch watching that moment. And when Darth Vader tells Luke that Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father, and Luke says, "He told me enough. He told me you killed him." And then, of course, Vader gives those iconic lines, "No, I am your father." I mean, it goes just like that. It sounds just like that. But I remember that moment in my life, and I remember sitting there and it being such a big deal. And again, I'm watching this, 3-4 years after it actually was put out there on a big screen. So then to go with my family and to see Return of the Jedi in the movie theater was just this, amazing, mind-blowing experience for me. And of course, at the time, we thought, hey, that's it. There's 3 great movies and they're over and the story is complete. And we were wrong. But before those prequels came out, again, the prequels were 1999 was The Phantom Menace, 2002 was Attack of the Clones, and 2005 was Revenge of the Sith. And they're not widely loved by Star Wars fans. I don't hate them. I'm not a huge Phantom Menace fan, but I get what they were trying to do. I get why they were released. But before they were released, after Return of the Jedi was released in 1983, that's when the big connection between Disney and George Lucas and Star Wars actually started happening. And I go into the history and the background and all of the kind of fine details of the history of Star Tours, the attraction, on my Word of the Week episode titled Star Tours. I don't have a number for that because when I started doing this, I just used the titles for the words of the week. So just the best way to find it is to Google Ear to Their podcast, Star Tours, and it will be the first result that comes up. Also, I will include a link to that episode in the show notes so you can listen to all about how the relationship between George Lucas and Disney started and the history and the building of Star Tours. But let's jump ahead to 2011. Now, 2011 is when Star Tours on both coasts in Disneyland and in Walt Disney World was updated to the 3D attraction that we have now. All of the old footage, all of the old scenes were scrapped and all brand new high-def 3D scenes were filmed for the new Star Tours, The Adventures Continue. So you started going to planets like Endor and Naboo and the Wookiee planet. I forget the name of it. Is it Kashyyyk? It's one of those. I forget the name. And you would still get to the Death Star. You would still go to other planets. You would do pod racing on, what is the name of the planet? Oh my God, Tatooine. Man, I was going to get some Star Wars fans upset right there. You also got to be a pilot in the ice planet or on the ice planet Hoth and bring down some Imperial walkers. Lots and lots of cool stuff for us huge Star Wars fans to totally geek out over. And then in 2015, it was announced that scenes from Star Wars The Force Awakens would be added to Star Tours. So now instead of the standard Yoda projection, now we get BB-8 sometimes. Now there's a scene with the Millennium Falcon with Flynn not piloting, I guess Rey is supposed to be piloting the Falcon, although she's not in that scene. But Finn is the gunner and he's communicating with us in our Star Speeder. And it was just announced very, very recently that new scenes from the all-new Star Wars The Last Jedi would be added to Star Tours in both Disneyland and in Disney's Hollywood Studios. So on November 15th, 2017, these new experiences or these new scenes on the attractions debuted. You can now visit the Planet of Crate, that's spelled Crait, during Star Tours. Crate is a small mineral-covered planet located in a remote section of the galaxy. Spoiler alert, but from everything we've heard, it seems like the battle between the Resistance and the First Order in the new Star Wars film, or at least a battle, will take place on this planet of Crate. Now, if you've seen the trailers, which unless you've been living under a rock or don't have any access to electronics, you probably have, then you've seen the ships flying down low above that red sand planet. That's the one we're talking about. But what's really interesting about the new version of Star Tours is that you land. The attraction actually finishes up on the planet of Batuu. Now, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I actually got to experience this attraction a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. So I've ridden a new version of Star Tours. I'm not going to tell you what Batuu looks like, but it is the new trading port, the new planet from the all new lands that are coming to Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios. So yes, the planet of Batuu is where you will journey to when you enter the new Star Wars Galaxy's Edge lands in both parks. So kind of like a preview, right? You, in a new Star Tours, in a new version of Star Tours, you land at Batuu. So it's described, the planet of Batuu is described as this by supervising Imagineer Scott Trowbridge. This used to be a vibrant trading port back in the old sub-lightspeed days. But now with the advent of hyperspace, its prominence has kind of fallen and faded a little bit, which has made it a great spot for those who don't want to be on that kind of mainstream path. The smugglers, the bounty hunters, the rogue adventurers looking to crew up, the people who don't want to be found. Basically, all of the interesting people. So the development team of this new land, of this new planet, they drew their inspiration from real-world locations like Istanbul and Morocco. And they actually traveled to these places to study the architecture, the culture, and the weather. Now, when you go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge starting in 2019, you are going to be entering a time that is after the events of the Return of the Jedi, but before the events of the new trilogy that we have going on today. So you're going to be walking right into the rising presence of both the First Order and the Resistance. Now, as you might have heard, the new Star Wars Galaxy's Edge land will have two new attractions. One will allow riders to fly and to control a secret mission on the Millennium Falcon, and the other will place guests right into the middle of a battle between the First Order and the Resistance. There will also be a newer version of a cantina on the planet or in the land, and here guests are going to be able to choose their own narrative, right? They're going to be able to choose their own adventure. So I'm not quite sure whether this will be stored on a Magic Band or some other type of wearable kind of tech, but apparently the choices that you make both in the land of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and on the attractions like the Millennium Falcon attraction and the First Order versus the Resistance attraction, those choices, the way you act, the way you behave, are going to dictate how both the bad guys and the good guys treat you in the land itself. The rumor is also that will also have an effect on how you're treated at the Star Wars hotel that is also going to be built. So it's basically, if you have ever seen the HBO show Westworld, this is going to be a Westworld for Star Wars fans, right? They're saying the cast members won't be traditional cast members like John from Minneapolis or Phil from Philadelphia. They will. You know, it's funny. When I was a cast member and I would always have Phil from Philadelphia on my name tag, people would always ask, "Oh my God, Phil from Philly. Did your mom and dad do that on purpose?" Yes. They named me Phil from Philadelphia, fully knowing that one day I would be a Disney cast member and other cast members would make jokes at my expense. But anyway, already cast members in Walt Disney World are already part of a show, but these cast members will be an even bigger part or a more integral part of the show. So Phil won't be from Philadelphia. He'll be from Hoth or from Batu or from one of the other Star Wars galaxy planets. And in that cantina, maybe your bartender isn't a human after all. He's an alien cast member from somewhere else in the galaxy. That is the hope. That is the blue sky. That is what we're looking at for Star Wars: A Galaxy's Edge. And I, for one, couldn't be more excited about it. Now, like I said, the new movie is coming out very, very soon in the next couple of days, or for me, tomorrow is when I go to see it. I'm sure a lot of you listening right now are going to see it or getting geared up, getting your Star Wars t-shirts out of the drawer, hanging them up on a hanger, getting ready to go. But for those of us who are, or those of you who are headed to Hollywood studios before 2019, and, because it's still 2017, you have a little while to go, and you still want to get your Star Wars fix, well, there's still a lot of Star Wars to be had in the park, even before this opens, the new Galaxy's Edge opens up. So the stage show in front of the Hollywood Theater in Disney's Hollywood Studios, Star Wars: A Galaxy Far, Far Away, is now playing several times a day. This features characters like Darth Vader, Stormtroopers, Kylo Ren, Captain Phasma, C-3PO, R2-D2, Chewbacca. I mean, the list goes on and on. Darth Maul. They actually very recently, just a couple of months ago, introduced Rey. So Rey is actually at each and every show. And an amazing, amazing lookalike for Daisy Ridley pretty much every time I've seen that show. So that's a really good way to get your Star Wars fix. There are also stormtroopers patrolling Hollywood Boulevard and the animation courtyard. So you can stop. They don't really stand still very long for photo opportunities. They will once in a while stop and allow for one. But they are mostly mobile and moving and telling you to keep moving along. They will kind of come up to you and bother you, which is a lot of fun. Then, of course, there still is the Jedi Trials of, the Trials of the Temple, which is the Jedi Training Academy show several times a day. That is in front of the Star Tours building right out there by the AT-AT and the Ewok Village. Your young kids can be a part of that show. They can learn the ways of the Force from a Master Jedi and fight characters like Kylo Ren, like Darth Maul, like Darth Vader. That's a really fun one. They only allow adults, funnily enough, to fight them on Star Wars Day, I believe. So on May the 4th, if you are an adult, you can suit up in the Padawan outfit and go up against Darth Vader or Kylo Ren. For some reason, I always want to call that show Legends or Jedi Legends of the Hidden Temple. That's not what it's called. That was a show on like Nickelodeon, Legends of the Hidden Temple, when my sister was a kid. I think I was in high school, way too old to watch it, but I watched it anyway. All right, that's a little tangent for you. Of course, if you're in Hollywood Studios, don't miss out on Star Wars Launch Bay. There are meet and greets in there. You can meet right now Chewbacca, Kylo Ren, or BB-8. Usually they're 20 to 30 minute waits for each character, not very long. My children have met all three. Our favorite to meet is Kylo Ren. It's just an unbelievably well done character experience. The Chewbacca one is great. The BB-8 one is my least favorite of the three, only because there's only so much that BB-8 can do at a meet and greet. He's kind of stationary in, one spot, but Chewbacca and Kylo Ren can walk around and they talk and interact with you. Kylo Ren will scare the pants off of anyone. I mean, kid, baby, child to adult. He has scared my wife on several occasions. He always seems to follow her out the door. And although he's kind of a slight skinny guy, he's a big, tall guy, and he freaks her out. So that's a really, really fun one. Chewbacca, once my kids brought in a doll of Anna, it was like a baby doll of Anna from Frozen. And he took it from my daughters and he cradled her and he kind of walked her around like a real baby. And it was great. We have some great videos and pictures of that. So like I said, those meet and greets are only 20 to 30 minute waits. You get some phenomenal pictures with those characters, and that's something that's totally worth doing. Also, there's a little section in there where you can trade with the Jawas. So if you're not sure what the Jawas are, they're the little tiny guys in the robes with the hoods and the glowing yellow eyes from the original Star Wars movie. They're the ones that kind of kidnap R2-D2 and C-3PO and sell them to Luke and his Uncle Owen. Yeah, I know. I'm totally nerding out with Star Wars right now. But listen, that's what this episode's about. It's about nerding out, and that's what I'm here for. So anyway, make sure you bring some things to trade with the Jawas. Don't try to trade them like, a piece of trash from your pocket. Bring something substantial, like a pin, a Disney pin. Now, don't bring a really super expensive one because I don't know if the Jawas can understand the value of a really good pin. But bring a pin or don't bring money. They won't take money. I can understand why. They're not going to sell you something. But you can try to trade them like an action figure, anything that's not super personal or expensive or valuable to you. And they kind of trade back based on what you give them. So I've heard of people getting like DVDs if they trade something really good. It's neat. It's a neat, fun experience. And you get your pictures with the Jawa. That's really cool because they're really small. They're like the size of my oldest daughter. So that's kind of fun because I'm not a very tall guy. So a picture of me with the Jawas makes me seem like I'm a giant. And I'm 5'7", so, that's a lot of fun. There are also Star Wars movie props. Some are real, some are reproductions. They have lightsabers in there. There is a speeder bike from Return of the Jedi. They have Rey's speeder and costume from The Force Awakens. There are models of ships. There's models of the Death Star. There's Han Solo's costume. There's a Darth Vader costume. Pretty much anything a real Star Wars fan would totally geek out about, you'll totally geek out in there. So, yes, if you are going to Hollywood Studios and you want your fill of Star Wars, do not skip Star Wars Launch Bay. And at the end, like all great Star Wars attractions, it empties into a gift shop. But this gift shop's really cool because it's all Star Wars stuff. So they have like figurines and books and DVDs and lightsabers and all kinds of stuff that you can buy. Phone cases, I bought a Death Star phone case in there. Oh, there's just really neat, kind of different, unique memorabilia that you can buy in that store. So yes, even though Star Wars A Galaxy's Edge isn't coming to Hollywood Studios or Disneyland till 2019, there is still plenty of Star Wars to tide us over until then. And that is going to do it for this week's Ear to There Disney podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. Man, is that a mouthful. Thank you again to Bob Gurr for answering the question at the beginning of the episode. Again, if you want to get a question into Bob, the phone number to call is 267-551-1971. And thank you so much again for listening. Like I say every week, I really appreciate it. This episode was one that I really wanted to do. I love Star Wars. I love the Star Wars presence in the parks. I can't wait for the new Star Wars stuff. I can't wait for the new Star Wars film. You may have already seen it by the time you're hearing this episode, so if you did, I hope you enjoy it. Don't worry, no spoilers here. I won't tell anyone about the movie or anything on my podcast or on any of my social media pages. So again, thank you so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There Disney podcast every Monday morning, as well as a new episode of the Ear to There podcast or Ear to There Disney podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week, each and every Wednesday morning. So until next time, thank you again so much for listening. Have a phenomenal week. May the Force be with you. Bye-bye.